You're listening to the Physio Matters podcast in association with rehabmypatient.com, and this is session 101. Welcome back to Physio Matters. I'm still Jack Chew. And when we retired the monthly Physio Matters podcast, we did say we would bring you some special podcasts now and again. We kept the feed ticking over. We've been moving some of my live Chewing It Over podcasts that we've been doing twice a week onto the feed, as well as our partner shows. And it gives me great pleasure to get back behind the saddle of a long-form interview with none other than Lorimer Moseley. Now, we've had Lorimer on the show before. Flick interviewed him about when he was last in the UK for Flipping Pain, as well as then having worked with him before at IFOMT 2016. But this was the first time really, especially in a while, I'd had a chance to have a decent chat with him about all things, particularly around how he sees things moving and going, how he accounts for some of the critiques of his own work, as well as then where the pain science field is going in how it intersects with therapy and performance. Him and his team have a new Master Sessions course, which is over the 17th to the 21st of November, and it spans time zones. They manage it really well. It's an online event where they span different time zones and make it really accessible. And so go to lesspainbetterperformance.com to sign up and register for what is inevitably going to be cutting-edge content from Lorimer and his team. It's really interesting in this interview to be able to discuss with him not just the ways in which this works with his work applies to people with complex and persistent pain, but also how this will span across all different levels and athletic processes, and something that really can help with human performance from basic ADL function through to high-end elite sports. So hope you enjoyed this interview with Lorimer Moseley. I'll be back at the end to tell you about a few other exciting updates, including our latest Therapy Live plans, which we have had some major changes to, and a new website that's out soon as well. So very exciting times. I'll see you at the end for more on that. And in the meantime, I bring you Lorimer Moseley. Delighted to be here today with Lorimer Moseley. And Lorimer, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I know that on many of these shows, including mine, the first question ends up being sort of giving a potted history of your biography, etc. But I know that exists in plenty of spaces elsewhere. So if you don't mind, I wondered if I could jump straight in and ask, what are your current roles, responsibilities, and priorities as they stand? What are you up to, and how do you balance your time right now?
Wow, lots of questions in there. So my current roles and responsibilities, that's an easy one. I can rattle them off. So I'm currently director of a body called Impact in Health, which stands for Innovation, Implementation and Clinical Translation in Health at the University of South Australia. We're driving towards real world better outcomes for people with 4 grand health challenges, with one of those 4, persistent pain, stroke recovery, persistent breathlessness, and the rural metro health divide. And I guess it won't be any surprise to anyone that my main interest in there is the persistent pain group. So I lead that group here at the University of South Australia. I run a non-for-profit called Pain Revolution, and I am officially a Bradley Distinguished Professor at University of South Australia, which hopefully sounds posh.
It sounds very distinguished.
I think it's meant to be. Anyway, so that's what I do, and our research group, we do stuff only on humans. So anything from experiments on live humans, where we might do something to them and ask them what it feels like, or we might record their brain activity after they do something or we do something to them. All of these things are around understanding the problems that people with pain manifest with, or ultimately we're looking for new treatment targets. And then the next phase in that journey is, if we've found a new treatment target, we try and work out a way to treat it. And if we can find out a way to treat it, we then test that in a clinical trial. And if we can demonstrate its effectiveness in a clinical trial, we then move it to implementation, which is changing clinical practice or taking it to the wider world. And that's where Pain Revolution comes in. So we're a not-for-profit that supports rural and regional healthcare professionals to implement best practice. So that's the things I do. And then the last part of the question, I think, was more about the sort of research questions. Have I?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was roles, responsibilities, and priorities.
Wow. Well, the priorities. I think they, for me, they're the same as the most interesting things for me. I think if it was roles, responsibilities, and most interesting things, they would align as well. And ultimately, I feel like I'm on a very steep learning curve with improving the way we teach people about pain, improving the way we exploit inbuilt bioplasticity across human systems. Now, there's a bit of jargon there. So, increase how do we exploit the human's capacity or drive for change better? And there, I'm thinking priorities wise, I'm thinking in their understanding of the problem. I think the data are coming in thick and fast now to say that when people do learn a contemporary understanding of mind, body, pain, those sorts of things, then they have better outcomes. But the data are also coming in to say we haven't been very good at imparting that understanding, and we need better ways to do that. So I'm quite excited about that. Um, and then I'm really excited about the other end of stuff with pretty theoretical models of how it is that aspects of the human, for example, the variability within biological systems, is a resilience and or a vulnerability factor, and that's sort of tougher conceptually and hard to plan experiments. Part of that is this bunch of experiments we've been doing for a long time on classical conditioning, and they're really hard experiments to do. And I love trying to find out ways to ask questions that are really difficult to answer. Yeah, how does that go? Is that a well-rounded view?
Well, there's certainly plenty. Yeah, and I think it certainly tees me up for me next one, which is then, what role or line of work have you enjoyed most in your career?
Wow. Jeepers. I there's almost nothing in my job that I don't enjoy, and I enjoy most things in my job equally. So, um, if I was to write write a job description for how I'd like to be spending my time when I was, in my early 50s, which I am now, and get paid for it, it'd be very similar to what my actual job description is. I guess at the core of it all is that uh, every day I work with clever, kind, and community-minded people, and all three of those things turn me on. Um, and I think I'm a creative person, and I'm able to do research in a scientific framework that that utilizes that creativity. So I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. But there's almost nothing that I would be really out of place in answer to that question, Jack. I absolutely love turning on the. I turned on the football on the television. It's final series here in the AFL, and I see people running around out there that I met when they were in a really dark place, about to retire, and here they are doing great, just doing amazing human performances, and that really rocks my belly. I just get really excited about that. Um, so that was a very topical thing.
One of the things that, and the reasons for that question, is because very few people have such a breadth from the depths of neuroscience research through to the pragmatic application and being literally on a bike in a peloton that goes to a rural community to then actually advocate the application of that at the grassroots, right? There's everything in between, from education of therapists to education of patients to, and it's just that breadth makes me wonder whether or not you have any. Is that out of a sense of duty? Is that out of a sense of that's how you prefer things to be, or is it that you just wonder if there's any corner of it that you have as a preference?
um, I think that, yeah, any corner of it that I have as a preference, I don't think so. I think any component of it that I did way more than I do, I think it would reduce the enjoyment. Um, I've always been someone that enjoys change and enjoys sort of lots of things on the go. So I think if I was to really embed myself in one aspect of my work, I would find it less satisfying, and I think I'd feel less effective at it as well. I think it's that some aspects of that breadth, they really feed each other. For example, you're talking about the actually literally being in the peloton and going to country towns and getting up in front of 100 members of the public with all sorts of trouble and entertaining them
Mm.
with pain science, and the scientifically based hope of contemporary models of care, is very good for my research right at the other end of the system, of this work system that I'm involved with. Those conversations and those expressions on people's faces when I say something that doesn't land, is a trigger for a new question in the lab, uh, and and the conversations that happen. So, we often present all this. Whenever I'm talking about this to granting bodies and things like that, I have a spiel that starts with, our research group. Our research traverses the translational pipeline from fundamental human systems experiments to implementation. But we could easily say that it traverses the same pipeline back in the other direction, where the challenges that a healthcare professional in the bush, so in rural areas, a lone practitioner, um, the struggles that they're having implementing best care, or the struggles they're having with all their shearers with chronic back pain or whatever, starts the conversation. I meet those people, and we have a
Mm.
conversation, and that goes back down the other line and say, so what is the problem here, and how can we address that problem? And it's really not a pipeline. It's like a revolving, merry-go-round or carousel
Mm.
of stuff. But you asked whether I feel a duty. I don't feel a duty that's a burden in any way, but I do have a strong conviction that science is only as good as its capacity to improve the human condition.
Right.
And a scientist of the sort that I am, an applied human systems and then clinical scientist, that I think that comes with a very clear responsibility to not waste time on getting this to the people whose lives can benefit now from it.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
if we are to rely on the conventional pathways, which is effectively scientific articles, textbooks, university degrees, uh, accreditation bodies, I don't know. There are stats that people throw around about 17 years from discovery to human impact, and that I feel I feel a little bit like, well, what a waste. Like, that's a quarter of my life or a fifth of my life or something. Let's get it out there now, and things like Pain Revolution, but also the other things I've been involved with, like Body and Mind when I was running.
Mm.
They're very much motivated by my deep respect and love for the scientific method as a way of generating knowledge, and the potential impact that can have on a human somewhere right now. So let's do our best to get that knowledge
Yes.
to those humans that can benefit.
And so if we can zoom in a little bit on some of the sort of foundational, dare I say, sort of talking points. They're not just talking points, of course. They're sort of areas of deep thought and neuroscientific understanding of pain in more recent decades, and sort of get your any updated thoughts you have on them. And so, for example, one phrase that's sort of certainly followed you around a little bit is whether nociception is necessary or sufficient for pain. Could we just revisit that as to what is your take on that, and has it evolved or matured in recent times?
Yeah, it's certainly evolved, and I really hope it's matured. Um, I still stand by the statement that nociception is neither sufficient nor necessary for pain, um, and I think the evidence to support that is very compelling. Uh, but I guess sitting around that question is a deeper understanding. I feel like I have a deeper understanding of uh, signal generation in the periphery by different types of neurons. So if we were to talk about free nerve endings, uh, those neurons in the periphery or in the tissues of the body that uh, do not innervate specialized mechanoreceptors. And we call them free nerve endings because the last little bit of the A delta fibers doesn't have myelin, but it doesn't have a specialized mechanoreceptor, and the C fibers have no myelin or have a different myelin structure. And that group of neurons, I'm fascinated by them, and I'm now asking questions, or we're asking questions in our research group, and I guess we're engaged in those conversations with research groups who are actually, their expertise is on those neurons, right? I don't do experiments on those neurons, um, but those conversations are more around what is nociception. I mean, how do we make most sense of how the periphery encodes data? And for example, I don't think nociception is an on or off event. I think that it's better to think about nociception as an extraordinary data capture facility that has both digital properties and analog properties. And what I mean by that is that there's a wide range of different kinds of free nerve endings that have anywhere from a very low threshold, so they're very easily activated, to a very high threshold, which means that they're not very easily activated. They have a wide range of delays between presentation of the stimulus and activation of the neuron. So some of them are very quickly adapting to the stimulus, some are very slowly adapting. Some of them stay on when the stimulus is finished. Some cut out immediately. And in no physiologically predictable situation do nociceptors do their thing outside of the rest the rest of the sensory detection and encoding system. I mean, the I'm blown away. Even as I think about it now, Jack, I'm just blown away by the extraordinary complexity, even of detection of a tissue event. When I talk about this with in a teaching capacity with health professionals or other scientists or the general public, I'd often use a phrase of the symphony of data that arrive at the spinal cord. And what I'm trying to capture there is, I guess 15 years ago we were all floored by the extraordinary capacity of the brain and this orchestra in the brain that was very complex and could produce these symphonies of outputs. And that degree of complexity I now associate with the peripheral detection system, most obviously nociceptors. And the complexity increases the closer you get to consciousness. So, I don't even begin to think we're close to understanding how spinal cord processing of incoming data works. And then we've got to go up to the brain, and then it gets more complex again. But
If I was to ask which of them, could I ask if which of them would you, in the fullness of time, would you be most confident would hold up? Like, which is more like, or a better way of putting that would be, which would be more likely to potentially need revision? So the necessity or sufficiency Like, do you have more confidence that nociception is not necessary for pain, or more confident that nociception is not sufficient for pain?
I have very high confidence in both of those things. Um, but if I you haven't given me permission to do this, Jack. But if I change the question
Do it.
just slightly to say in the real clinical world, and this is what I'm always interested in, and this is why I make sure I still see a few patients every week to not lose track of those things. In the real life clinical world, uh, how often do I think we encounter people in pain who don't have primary nociception going on, uh, or how many times do we encounter people who do have primary nociception going on but don't have pain? Um, if those sort of questions are easy because we never see the second group because they've got no reason to come and see us, right? So people might have raging primary nociception, but if they don't have pain, then we're not going to see them. And in the former group, then I think there's really compelling evidence that as pain persists and as the other inputs into a complex danger evaluation, protection evaluation system, then people can have pain when there's really no reasonable evidence that they would be having a primary nociceptive event. So I don't know if I've skirted your question a bit there.
I suppose I wouldn't let you fully skirt it, and I don't think you have. But I suppose I will admit that when I think about, and I think it could be well biased by, as you say, patient selection as to who's likely to seek my help. But the nociception not being sufficient for pain feels instinctively something that would be so unlikely to need any major revision. Whereas I feel like perhaps in the fullness of time we come to understand that nociception, again, if we, depending on how that term is defined, could be understood to be present in enough cases through mechanisms that are yet to be understood, the better understanding neuroimmune features, the better understanding of how these things can sort of linger and loiter, even in persistent cases, means that I don't know. It's just my hunch being that if someone held a gun to my head and made me choose which of those statements held up better, then I feel like the sufficiency feels like it's on firmer ground. But then again, that's why I admit that what's underneath that question is a wonder as to whether or not you have any variable confidence intervals on each of those statements.
Yeah, well, I love the gun to the head example, um, and I think I'd go the same way if I had to pick one of those two things, and that I think that reflects scientific uh, method, right? So it's a lot easier for us to do something that we know is activating nociceptors and observe the human experiencing no pain and reporting no pain. So we've got immediate access to proof of the presence of nociception without the presence of pain. Uh, but so it's very easy for us to evaluate whether an individual is in pain. You know, in the vast majority of cases, but it's very hard for us to demonstrate that there is no nociception. So um, I think you're right. I think that there are there are many potential avenues for us gaining new information about what might be happening inside neurons in the human. We don't have the capacity yet to get data on that very easily. I mean, it's very challenging even to get data on what's happening in a peripheral nerve. We use intraneural electrodes for that, but we not being me, we being the scientific community. But that's really challenging and not very specific and all that sort of stuff. So there's a limitation of the scientific method that just means that the ease of seeing whether someone's in pain or not is just way higher than the ease of seeing whether there's nociception or not. And you mentioned almost in passing, about nociception, however we define that. I actually think that's a critical question for your broader question, because without a shared understanding of what we mean by nociception, then it's always going to be ambiguous and challenging to have a shared understanding about a concept that integrates that. And I guess there are different schools of thought on what nociception is. Some people would limit it to the primary nociceptors that innervate body tissue and terminate within the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Some would include projections from the dorsal horn of the spinal cord up into the brain as encoding or transporting, if you like, nociception. Others would talk about neural networks in the brain, neuroimmune networks in the brain, as being part of nociception. On the other end, some would say, well, it's only some of those primary nociceptors sitting in tissue that carry nociception. So there's 5 distinct, well-populated groups within the scientific community who already don't agree on what nociception is.
All trying to use some of the same language, and that's where definition of terms, as you rightly said, even on nociception, can make it confusing and lead to sometimes people talking past each other rather than truly engaging and being able to disagree on the same format. Pain is another one of those things whereby philosophically it's quite challenging in a sense that is a word being used across cultures in various different translations to describe a sensation that realistically we are going to need to trust who describes themselves to have pain, gives a sense of vagueness in the challenges of just linguistics. Is that something that you, when you were to say how might you identify whether someone has pain or not? Do you know as a neuroscientist, or do you have any confidence in anything that would be more accurate than self-identification with that term?
No.
And would you ever feel it's tempting for us to pursue that?
Yeah, no, it is tempting. It would be. It's a very attractive idea, and it is being pursued, right? So there are actually vast resources going into scientific programs to get the neural signature of pain, so we can take a scan and decide how much pain someone's in and what it's like and all that. There are people doing the same thing, looking at molecular patterns within blood, so taking blood tests to decide whether someone's in pain or not. This is a really challenging area of research, in my view, in part because of what strikes me as an extraordinary redundancy within biological systems, not just the nervous system, in its capacity to produce protective outputs. And so what I mean by that is that within an individual, there are clearly multiple ways that biological system can produce pain and identical pain. And the reason we know that is that there is always some degree of variability in any scanning technique we've got, like functional scanning technique we've got. There is always individual variability that does not follow the variability in the percept.
Right.
Do you think I've expressed that accurately?
No,
Not sure.
I think I follow. So we could be both wrong.
I'm sure we are both. Well, definitely both not completely right, but that's the beauty of science, right, Jack? That we're obliged to be wrong. But that question is being presented as we speak in several ways around the world, because it is a seductive idea that we could measure pain without the individual telling us anything. And there are some really profound pockets of clinical care where that would be so useful. One of my PhD students at the moment, Emily Moore, is doing her work looking at how people with complex communication needs, including people who can't talk, can communicate to us about their pain. And now, if we had some scan, blood test, or thing we could put on them that will give us a readout, the lives of those people would be transformed. That would be fantastic. Uh, and there are other people pursuing that so that we can detect the liars.
I wondered if you were going to go there. That was the thing I was going to say. You end up with there's some real obvious social and ethical upsides that you've outlined really, really well there. But there's also that, I think, one of the almost aversions to even the pursuit of that knowledge. Kind of, I worry about the social consequences of what that mean between someone then having their self-identification with both that terminology and their experience that they are naming pain, to then be sort of, well, that doesn't marry to this objective reading that we have from some, say, combination of scans and other supposedly empirical tests, that would then be seen as a contrast, that the gap between those two things is therefore your deception, and that there is some sort of, you end up in that very dated but still existent accusation of malingering or somehow social gaming. And but then equally, I quickly check myself and realize that my fear of social consequence of some of that should not necessarily decrease the pursuit of the scientific truth of what we might be able to identify. And so I kind of have these grappling ethics there, or consequentialist ethics versus the pursuit of truth on a scientific level. And I know that if I'm experiencing that as in my small part, then I wonder, do you have that on steroids?
Well, these are what our group calls cab sav conversations, and um, we have a significant wine budget for that very reason. But
Mm.
um, I think I really resonate with what you're describing for yourself there, Jack, because I think um, if we just stuck with the risk benefit appraisal, um, there are significant risks and significant benefits, significant potential risks and significant potential benefits. I think with this particular issue, um, I think we're saved a little bit from that, because at the moment I just don't see it on the horizon. I mean, maybe one day we'll get there, but um, the I mean the organ that that last touches it, if you like, So when you have pain, I do. I've been accused by people who I have deep respect and love for, of being a neurocentric person, and I like to think that I'm becoming a neuroimmune centric person. But um, if you'll bear with me while I just talk about the brain as the last bit of the last organ, if you like, of the human before we experience this conscious feeling that we call pain,
Hmm.
and that we all call our pain and all that. I mean, it turns me on every time I think about it. The complexity of our brains, just our brains,
Mm.
let alone all the rest of the system that the brain is integrated with. The complexity is such that we are so far away from being able to measure stuff that I think we would have to measure to be able to make these calls. It's a very different scenario from comparing, using machine learning in a big bunch of, uh, let's say, healthy humans and otherwise healthy humans with back pain, and use machine learning with all these scans and heaps of data, and eventually we'll be able to show, using a scan, we'll be able to say, well, that person there, they were in pain. That person there, they weren't. Um, that's that's sort of where we're at, and we can get to the stage of linking it to the intensity of pain reported by that person. But I always think here of uh, yeah, dear friend Gian Domenico Alessandro Magnifico Fantastico Ionetti, now at University of Roma, and his exasperated, slightly Italianized English at the failure across our community to remember the reverse inference problem. And that problem is that it is one thing to be able to show pain of 5 out of 10 is different from no pain. It's a very, very different proposition to show that pain of 5 out of 10 is different from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we're stuck with that, and we're a long, long way away from that. But you can put a hot thermite on the back of almost anyone and ask them what it feels like, and they say 5 out of 10, and then you can tell them a funny joke, and in moments of telling that joke, that individual is pain-free, entirely pain-free. And then after the funny joke where they've cucked themselves and it's just fantastic, you ask them what's your pain like. Now they might say it's 4, and then it goes back up to 5. Now you want to make it a short joke because they'd probably get a 3rd-degree burn if it was a long joke. But do you know this? And I guess what I'm getting at is that incredibly precise and nuanced capacity that the human develops over the course of their life in differentiating different feelings and communicating them. And it seems to me that we are so far away from that. That is probably more of a reason for us to be really respectful of the risks, the potential risks of forgetting things like the reverse inference problem and overgeneralizing really exciting neuroscience research or in fact blood sampling research, really exciting stuff, but overgeneralizing that to start making statements about this person's lying or this person's malingering or sidestepping the human, because after all it's almost it's the human who experiences pain. It's not actually the organism. It's not the individual structures. It's this fearfully and wonderfully complex, unified self. What is it to be me? It's me who feels the pain. It's not my back.
And that's the mystery of consciousness, of course. That means that we know how far away we are from solving that, and that probably does at least buy us time, but does mean that it's only right for us to grapple with those ethics and try to make sure we're appropriate. And you're right, we've not got nearly enough alcohol on the table for us for now to get stuck as far into that as we might like to. I wonder if I can ask. And I feel like I know you're working enough to sense your answer to this question, but I'd be interested in visiting your answer as well as then why not the other. In that, is pain a perception or a sensation?
This is a really active. Well, it's not a really active debate. It's very active debate among, I think, a pretty small portion of the community who is grappling with what I think are different understandings of the same words again. So my answer to that question is, well, it all depends on what school you've come from, and which particular philosophers or physiologists or psychologists you might want to align yourself with. So I can really only answer that with, well, the way that I differentiate those two things is that sensation refers to the activation of neurons and the encoding and transmission of neural signals. Perception is the way I make sense of that. You can even go different breadths of this, but in order to contrast it with sensation, I would say perception is the thing we experience. So we see things, so we perceive things. That's visual. In my view, that's visual perception. Our retinas respond to various wavelengths and send messages along optic nerves, which get into the occipital cortex, and that's, in my view, visual sense. But it's highly troublesome, right, thing to talk about, because we also use in our day-to-day language, I've got this weird sensation. And I think so. Is it really that, or is it a weird perception? And and this is where the word, in my view, the words mean different things according to which sentences they're in, and what the conversation is, and who the deliverer and receiver of that data is at that time. Um, I know that there are people who uh, are really struggling to use those words in any way different from how they think they're best used, and are then using that to undermine the validity of data collected using those words, or even communicating using those words. And I think that's missing. I think it's missing the point. But I always enjoy thinking about those things. I really enjoy thinking about, what does someone mean when they say, I've got this sensation of bugs crawling along my back, or ants, or sensation of pins and needles. And I enjoy thinking about, so is that a sense? And I would think, I don't think it is. I think your brain's creating the perception of that because that is a potential explanation for the data it's receiving within the context, and on the basis of stored knowledge and internal models of things.
Mm. I
So I
wonder
don't think
if
it's wrong for us to discuss these things. I just think,
sure.
if it's not constructive,
Yeah,
then
there's a
it's less
temptation
exciting to
sometimes
me.
to maybe be pursuing it as a means of then dismissing certain either schools of thought, people and research, or because of what seems maybe a pedantic obsession with language. I think
Sure.
what you've described there as well with regards to what patients will say, and so even I feel pain, and then sometimes the pain as a sensation, as that word is best understood by particularly lay public, might be more attractive in some ways. Not that pain's attractive to anyone, but certainly it's more
Yeah,
attractive
sure.
an understanding of it than perception, which they would therefore, and certainly something I encountered when I was a bit clumsier with the use of illusions, or trying to help people to comprehend the fact that unfortunately you can be misled um, by other sensations, and say when we're using visual illusions to help people to comprehend the fact that sometimes you can be misled, for want of a better term, then that's where it's sometimes with some people not as an attractive a concept to then start to comprehend the arguments for perception amongst patients then experiencing what they feel we prefer the story we might tell ourselves over sensation. Not that that should then move us in terms of what is empirically true, but it's definitely something that we wouldn't want for us to rush too far away from where the public might be on something. And that's why I was felt really tempted to ask you that question in a way, is because as we started the conversation, we described your breadth across from the pragmatic application of this work through, of course, then to the pursuit of knowledge in its basic science form, means that then I imagine that we don't want a massive gap to bridge between the public and say therapists and scientists on this, and that if we can't use language in an appropriate way that would help them to understand why we're saying these things and to not seem dismissed by perception when they feel sensation, means it's possibly then in that context worth us sometimes getting into the detail of what we're meaning by terms.
Yeah, 100%. I think I follow, and um, I think I concur. So just to make sure that I haven't misunderstood, um, I two two clever, well-meaning, highly informed uh, healthcare professionals could use very different words for the same thing, right? Um, and they look upon the words chosen by the other person and think, that's so wrong. How dare that person use that word? It's not that at all. And then these two health professionals go to the same fictional patient, and we do our best to give them an understanding of what's going on inside them, and we use these words that drive each other nuts, right? But we present them to the patient within the context of a caring, clinically reasoned, empowering interaction that's respectful of that patient and uses all these communication skills that go way beyond our words. And both of those healthcare professionals impart positive and probably an accurate, reasonably accurate understanding of the situation. And what I think can happen in our field is that put my fingers up like I'm doing quotation marks around the word, but we, the experts, uh, I think we can both overestimate our own expertise and underestimate our own expertise. And what I mean by that is, uh, to explain what I mean by that, I'll recount some of the research we've been doing looking at the interactions that people are having within one-to-one clinical sort of understanding pain type encounters versus patients who encounter a digitized version or text version of something. And I think where we might underestimate our expertise is in the breadth of our capacity to communicate, um, and and that we can take uh, a bunch of words and communicate them to someone and impart an understanding that if we used exactly the same words written down on a piece of paper, they wouldn't impart any understanding at all, or they might even impart the wrong understanding. So I think it's very important for us to remember that uh, offering information or slogans or metaphors or other text-based or word-based tools of imparting information within the context of understanding the person in front of you, knowing a bit about their story, having a healthy respect for them and empathy and all that, is very different to using exactly the same slogans and metaphors put on a flyer or sent around on Twitter or something like that. I think, and any implication that the total failure in one of those formats implies that it won't work in the other format is, in my view, just naive to human interactions and all the skills that we all develop over the course of our lives and in clinical practice over the course of our clinical practice in communicating. Anyway,
And
I've gone off topic a bit there. I
no, I
apologize.
think that only highlights the fact that then one of the phrases I've found myself using increasingly, especially the last 5 years or so, is just cut each other some slack. Jeez, like just we've got to give each other room to communicate and to learn and to shape it and to not set off certain tripwires. And that applies across the board, but particularly when grappling with such complex topics that, of course, it's fairly young stuff. You know, we're developing it and we're understanding it, and we've learned some lessons. But God, there's so much more to know, and therefore to sometimes nitpick can be sort of pedantry at its worst. Of these things that we're talking about into the depths of say neuroscience and where it intersects, of course, with philosophy and language, how I suppose how important is it for clinicians to understand the latest and greatest in neuroscience when applying this with patients, in your opinion?
I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't know if anyone knows. And if we're saying the outcomes on which on which we base whether or not it's important are whether it improves the lives of the patient in front of us, then I don't think we know how informed we have to be on that. And there are certainly occasions when someone in trouble seeks care from someone who's very uninformed and subscribes to empirically disproved, is that a word? Is that the word? Empirically refuted
Mm,
understandings of the problem, and they offer care or treatment based on those refuted understandings of the problem, and the person gets better.
mhm.
there's clear evidence of that. So clearly, it's not critical for a positive short-term clinical outcome. But you asked the question of how important it is, and I guess it feels like that's a question for the individual healthcare professional, and whether how does being as deeply informed as you can be align with your values in how you want to approach your healthcare interactions. For me, it's very important, and therefore I'll always be attracted towards trying to understand things better, and trying um, not to I'm trying to work out what my words are here, Jack. I think I I feel like for me to offer the best care to another person, even in a non-clinical sense, but for me to be good, who I want to be, I want to be informed as I can be, and if there's good knowledge out there and relevant knowledge out there, I'd like to know that knowledge
Mm.
and bring it into that interaction. And there's probably healthcare professionals for whom that's not important. Um, they might have different motivators, or they might, yeah, a range of reasons. But I think the question is for the individual healthcare professional to answer. Somewhere in there are the thresholds of um, legal responsibility, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
accreditation threshold, um,
Well, I suppose it's
going up
then there's
higher and
something a
higher.
bit there's something then a bit vaguer, isn't there? Because there are levels definitely, but there's one beyond sort of legal duty, and then there's one of just sort of contemporary competence, I could say, which is going to be, of
Hmm.
course, as vague as the phrase is. But what I'm getting at there is, it seems only right with the technologies and access to updated information for people to have moved away from, say, a tissue centric and fairly narrow cause effect, damage equals pain, but having broadened their horizons and understood then, and maybe got a collection of analogies and metaphor that they might use with patients to help them to broaden their horizons of the fact that it's not quite like that. It's not that you've worn something out or damaged something, it's broken, and that's what it needs to heal. And therefore, that will then resolve the problem. They've kind of broadened the horizons on that. They're helping patients to comprehend that. But they may not, they then sometimes get addled with the guilt of perhaps then having that and functioning with that and getting results with that. But then to hear that neuroscience has not necessarily moved on, but has developed then an understanding through via, say, how does predictive processing intersect with this? How might I best understand the free energy principle? Some very complex, high-end topics for some people that would feel so clinically distant for them, that intimidates them into them wondering, how often should I be doing a fresh course or reading a fresh book, in such a way that that's kind of what, again, is underneath my question. Like, how contemporary must someone's knowledge be? Or is there a gap between the jobbing clinician in MSK and, say, the likes of yourself, that is not just acceptable but sensible, for the sake of not burdening a clinician with some of the detail?
Yeah, great. I really like that question because it almost takes us full circle to how we started this conversation, and about the work that I do, and my sense that that science is only as good as its ability to change humans. Um, and I think that part of the responsibility on people like me in jobs like mine is to um, identify what it is about what we're learning that stands to improve clinical care, and to have a way of communicating that, that is enabling and empowering of healthcare professionals to ultimately just improve their well-being, and hopefully through the pathway of greater self-efficacy and delivering better care. I think that we in the pain field we haven't we definitely haven't always got that right. um, I think from my own perspective, I discovered in my own clinical interactions that imparting a, a, a a degree of neuroscientific understanding to patients was associated with health benefit. And I did randomized controlled trials on that, which concurred. And then I mentioned at the start that, said, what's most exciting? And I said, I'm on this really steep learning curve about how to impart understanding of one's own biology and I guess one's own scientific makeup to improve oneself in the context of a clinical interaction. But also a part of that steep learning curve is understanding what information is actually helpful for the patient. And my current view on that is that I reckon I could have been having as good clinical responses without going into as much depth. And I'm learning more about that at the moment. And our research group, one of the lines of research that we're doing is relying on consumers who have recovered from chronic pain to tell us what are the most important aspects of pain science to learn that empower them, enable them to recover. And the reason we do that is also linked to your question around perception versus sensation. And my own view is that, well, the consumer should be telling us what words we use and what words are most likely to land. And we might have a core set of words that we use that is directed by consumers. So we're very engaged in that space at the moment. But to bring it back to the question about the healthcare professional, and you talked about, do they now have to update with the 5Es model and predictive processing systems and all that? My view is that until we the scientific community, and maybe the thinking community, I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of this conversation out there at the moment is, I feel like it's pretty embryonic. It hasn't delivered a really clear, clinically implementable framework or treatment or anything that's any different. So it's up to people like in my scientific community to take very seriously the role of packaging of knowledge into usable bits. And my feeling at the moment is that there are really significant usable bits that are coming out of pain science. But those usable bits are, I reckon, actually not so much updates of say, biological science. They're more updates of what the consumers are saying is important in the biological sciences and ways of thinking about that. So, I ran a couple of these master sessions things last year and again this year in May around fairly high level understanding of contemporary thought in how the brain works, and there's a bit of predictive processing stuff in there. And what I was very conscious of in that was, what is it about this newish? I mean, it's actually not that new, but it's fashionable predictive processing. What does it offer us that can actually make our clinical lives better? And I find that's a question that I'm much more comfortable answering myself, because I still see patients, and I see patients who I'm really challenged by clinically, and I see some of this stuff in predictive processing. Yeah, if well, I can see how that can make my life a bit better as a clinician and to deliver better care, and then I try and package that in a way that I can share with other healthcare professionals who don't have jobs doing the stuff that I do. They have jobs that are taken up entirely with delivering care to people in trouble. So it is my job to package it in a way that can help. And until we can package it in that way, I don't think we should be trying to sell it anywhere.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that
I mean that's
translation, because some people have got an aversion to translation because they feel it would water down the raw message of the hard science, and so it's this. We know that done badly, translation could sort of condescend and lose the end, the complete meaning of something. But done properly, of
sure.
course, it needs to be applicable, and for us to actually then not just be pursuing the health of people in 20 years time. As you said, there's a here and now and people suffering, and I think that does make sense. You've got a master session coming up on pain and performance, so less pain, better performance, and it sometimes surprises people. And I remember being surprised myself a number of years ago when I observed your work being applied to elite sport. I remember not an early study necessarily of yours, but an early study that I observed amongst elite cyclists, where you'd change the visual field and adjusted and noted pain differences in that based on angle. And I just think that maybe perhaps a misconception of your work being applied to persistent pain and complex chronic pain. Whereas actually, of course, it can be applied to anyone that's experiencing sort of pain and suffering in any context, and how, of course, pain would impair performance. So I wondered, if do you consider performance and high end, say, sporting performance as simply a functional end of a continuum of what someone is asking of their body, or do you see it as somewhat unique at all compared to, say, a layman?
Um, I think it. I definitely think the first. Um, in that, I think elite performers uh, are just asking more of their body and getting more out of their body than others. I see quite a few similarities between elite performers and industrial athletes, people who are also getting a lot out of their body day after day
Mm.
after day. Um, and but then the second part of the question was about unique, and I think some of these people, they they are almost unique in the mix of it might be torque production or motor coordination, but it might also be and this is where I think it gets well, it's always really interesting, but this is a particular area of interest of mine, or it might just be in um, their systems threshold for acting in self protection mode versus acting in performance mode. And I've worked with elite performers from a wide range of contexts for many years, actually. And in fact, I was working with elite performers before I did my PhD and before I really
Right.
got into the persistent pain space. In fact, my first job as a physiotherapist was with the New South Wales Academy of Sport, looking after endurance athletes, and my undergraduate degree was in biomechanics and physiotherapy. So I had an honours in biomechanics, and um, it was really a shift from that context for most of my attention over into a different context. So rather than helping the silver medalists get gold medals, I became more and more attracted towards helping the 45-year-old woman with 3 kids cleaner who can't pay the bills,
Mm.
uh, and that and then from there, torture survivors and all this sort of stuff. That for me, very academically um, engaging, challenging, and aligning with a lot of what makes me tick. But I've never let go of the elite performance interaction, and most of my most of my work in elite performance has been with people who are staring down the barrel of early retirement because of persistent pain, or because of this competing objective in their system of pain or performance. And I think that's where the principles of the human still apply, because these people are humans, right?
Mm.
And I think about how contemporary models of how the brain works uh, become higher stakes when it's the same brain that is needing to generate outputs in order to win the competition or whatever it is. as at exactly the same time as that brain is strategizing to keep this human safe.
Yeah.
And the idea of the size of the protective buffer that pain offers is in I see no evidence before me in across the basic sciences that elite athletes have fundamentally different um, functional neuroimmunology, if you like.
Yeah.
So there, in my and the best results I've ever got with elite performers has been around embracing this stuff, and in the first instance, um, treating these people like humans uh, rather than some sort of non-human performance machine.
Typically, the more high end the performance, the more tissue centric the care model, in part because of them being seen as machines. We find that language, we do apply that language in the language of machines and mechanics across all humans more than we should. But certainly in elite performance, that, I mean, it's a compliment to say, oh, that tough tackling midfielder, what a machine, and what an athlete. It can sometimes be synonymous, and therefore it does seem that we know from injuries and pain that, well, we'll see what the scan says within minutes of an injury is pervasive across elite sport, but also therefore trickles down. So do you still? I mean, perhaps I want to invite, in case you do want to disagree with that. But also, if that is the case, in your opinion too, how might we change that paradigm? And is it tougher in that environment?
Yeah, I do agree with the statement that, in fact, I'm of the firm belief, and I think with good reason, that the higher the athlete's salary or prestige, the more likely that athlete is to receive a really biomedically focused care.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I find that interesting in so many ways. So many ways. Um, I think that uh, the model of the athlete as a machine is, I think, certainly in my interactions, it's waning because there are just sufficient numbers of athletes who are clearly experiencing pain, although the tissues of that body part are amazing, and their ability to their command over that body part remains amazing in certain contexts. And so some of the work that I've done, we've looked at positive scan findings in asymptomatic thighs versus symptomatic thighs, and we published a paper. First author, I think, was Simon Summers or Sarah Woolwork, on evidence that the neural representations of the body and of the space around the body were disrupted in in very high level elite athletes, absolute top of their game in their sports, in exactly the same way as we find in people who are, you know, not working because of their chronic back pain for 10 years. And for me, these are manifestations of biological systems that have been honed over generations and generations in evolution, and our elite performers are not separate from that evolutionary pathway. But is it more difficult? Yeah, I think it is. Is it more difficult? Yeah, there's yeses and nos. So the yeses are that that mindset penetrates across the performance world, particularly in the physical performance world. Um, strength and conditioning teams that are all about that sort of machine model, and coaches who, well, I did it this way and then you should do it this way. That's all that sort of stuff. The injection mentality, the scan mentality, all that sort of stuff. And I think all those things have a role, and the work that I do interfaces very closely with sort of scans and numbers, metrics, and all that. But the other side where it's it's not more difficult is that these are often highly resourced organisations
Right.
where another week off the pitch is £100,000, or another week off the court reduces potential prize money by $1 million. And
Mm.
the stakes here are so high that when the evidence is presented, and the data suggests they're going in the right direction, then you can quickly have some transformational changes across high performance teams, or even across the entire organisation. But
Yeah.
I think the entire organisation, certainly in professional sport, the entire organisation needs to come for the ride to get optimal outcomes.
I wonder if I might be at risk of making a potentially dated sort of wind up like argument, but is there something to be said for, or do we have evidence that might support a theory that patients and athletes that are going to be very in tune with their body and almost the amazing things that they're able to achieve means that they are more likely, if that function is disrupted, to have a system and as an organism be naturally attentive then to its dysfunction, as well as they are the acute and very precise nature of their ability and performance. Is there anything that would support that?
Yeah, broadly, I think there is, and we've got three people presenting on master sessions in November that speak around this issue, and it's really interesting. And I think the broad principle that I would apply with that issue is that it all depends, and it depends on the individual athlete as well as their context or performer. So one of those three people presenting at master sessions is Dr. Bronwyn Ackerman. Bronwyn's done some really interesting work and has worked for a long time with elite musical performers, and they are obviously very in tune with their body within the context of their music,
Mm,
and so much so that some of them, she tells me, some of them report dysfunction in their system because of the timbre of the, is that how you say that word, the timbre, anyway, the sound that they notice is different, which gives them the cue that there's dysfunction in the system. Um, and others have this incredibly precise connection with their body within the context of music, and it's almost like they're totally disconnected outside of that context. But then
right.
she will tell me that there are others who manage to keep, and because of their elite capacity, can hide a dystonia that would disable the average person for months and sometimes years, and still perform at this extraordinary level. And this dystonia is a neurological
Mm,
disconnection with a body part. Another person who's presenting is Dr. Ebony Rio. Ebony's got a very strong reputation internationally for her work in tendinopathy, and she's really taken that field towards embracing a more unified human understanding. And she does a lot of work with professional ballet dancers, and observes quite similar things, that some of them will not, will get to the stage where they won't even look in the direction of their painful foot because they become so disconnected. But at the same time, they have an extraordinary awareness of the space around them and where their body is in space. And
yeah.
that becomes a very useful assessment um, context for someone like Ebony, because by charging or loading the system with threats outside of the body space, so they might be some psychosocial threat as an assessment, the elite level dancer, because they're working at such a high spatial acuity level, Ebony can see that compromise quickly.
Mm,
Um, and it's just like every other human in that psychosocial threats are threats. They're real life nerve impulses, and changed. They change activation gradients within the brain. And then the third person that I was thinking of was Leanne Rath, who has also done a lot of work with dancers, but now works more with older athletes who are almost like upper level recreational athletes. But some of the things that happen in older athletes include a reduction in the capacity of individual neuroimmune systems, which makes this idea of connecting with your body slightly more challenging, like it does with lots of stuff. So all three of these things speak to the opportunity that is offered working with performers with elite capacity, and by capacity I don't just mean aerobic or torque production, but also motor output and spatial acuity, all that sort of stuff. The opportunities that are presented by that, but also the challenges that are presented. And the whole reason I've gathered the people I have for master sessions, Less Pain, Better Performance, is that they have been working in this space, not just with elite performers, but with recreational athletes as well, and industrial athletes. But they've been doing that for a long time, and they're examples of people who, like me, want to bring the very best of contemporary science into their care. And the way they do that is, in my view, really cool. But obviously I think it's really cool because I think a bit like they do.
Sure. No, I think, but the balance of what we've just described there, of there being a strong case for the fact that this is the upper limit of human function, and therefore is still the baseline, getting the basics right and understanding and comprehending that and how it applies across the spectrum of human performance. But then there is also some of the self-selecting elements and unique features that we might need to consider when it comes to some of those really intricate high performance variables. And so I'm excited to see how you and your team explore that in full. For those that are interested, go to lesspainbetterperformance.com, sign up and snap those tickets up as quickly as you can, because as Lauren was just describing, it sounds like an absolute belter and hugely well regarded, the master sessions in general. So it's amazing to see you apply this, because it'd be tempting to wash, rinse, repeat your existing model, just doing some of the same old things. So I love it when you freshen it up so radically in this instance. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for doing all that you do. We're so lucky to have you thinking in this direction. It's amazing when we have one of our own of a sorts in physiotherapy and in the MSK space that is so renowned across such breadth, as we talked about at the start. And so I want to just make sure I get the chance to thank you on behalf of the listeners, because a lot of times when we ask, after knowing people that knew that this conversation was happening, there were some people didn't send questions. They just said, say thank you from me. And so it's amazing how many people are super appreciative of what you've done for us all and continue to do. So thanks for your time again today.
Oh, that's really generous, Jack. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone. I mean, it's a great opportunity to engage with people like yourself and then the people who are listening. And I'd like to return that sentiment that thank you guys for doing what you do on the coalface and actually improving lives each day. I don't take that for granted for a second, and I think it takes both of us to move the field forward. So, mutual admiration society.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, Jack. You have a cracker.
Thank you very much. And there you have it. Oh, it's good to be back. I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed getting that time with someone just to get into it and hear them out more thoroughly. I've been doing sort of 30-minute shows for quite a while now. And so, yeah, it was really nice to be able to throw that together as a special. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please do let us know. Really keen always to hear your feedback. Be sure to get over to lesspainbetterperformance.com to check out what Lorimer and his team have got in store for you in November. That is an absolutely cracking session planned. And also, if you're a member already, you are in for an absolute treat. We have just updated physio-matters.com as our membership site, full new software update, and we now have every piece of content that's been transcribed, so everything is then searchable. Every piece that we've ever produced and will go on to produce is now available on our most user-friendly site yet, and so we'll be transferring you over. If you are interested in joining us and you want the ultimate MSK content library, over 1,000 hours of content, that is now everything's got its own sort of certificates and it's really trackable, and it's got all linked by content topic, and yeah, just glorious. You're gonna absolutely love it. That's at physio-matters.com. physio-matters.com/join, and you will be able to join us there. And as we've always done, is that anyone that's ever joined our membership, they have never seen their prices go up. And so we will always honour the price of which you join us on. And that includes now. So it's £15 a month, $150 for the year. And if you sign up now, you will always have that price honoured as long as you continue with us. We're keen to try and make that as affordable as possible, and so we're really pleased with it, and we know you will be too. So looking forward to that. Also, therapy-live.co.uk, eyes peeled on there shortly for our World Cup special. We're going to do, just before the World Cup, Football World Cup, we're going to do a special event on sort of football sports medicine. And really, obviously, we're massive football fans here, and so excited about the World Cup. But also, it's also a premium time for thinking in the direction of how we can help footballers of all levels, especially after the summer we've had with the Lionesses and stuff. So we've got some great plans for some football-specific content there that we're going to do in late November. That will be quite an exclusive event, so you will want to snap up tickets, especially because our members will be getting first access to those. So do sign up at physio-matters.com for your membership to get first dibs on our latest Therapy Live special. So that's enough from me. Thank you so much. Thank you, of course, to Lorimer. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Physio Matters. And as I said, good to be back in the saddle, and also the opportunity for me to say you've been listening to the Physio Matters podcast, discussing physio matters because physio matters. Bye for now.